Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be graced by your wisdom and your love. Amen. Well, here we are, the first Sunday of the Advent season. We no longer have to stand on our tippy toes to see Christmas coming. You know, its bright colored lights and tinsel splendor is barreling down upon us with the relentlessness of a freight train. Can you feel it? Yet for the next 4 Sundays, as we prepare to celebrate this annual festival of faith and family and love, we still have a wee bit of time to think about what it all means. You know, just to take a pause and think, well, what does this mean? What does the story of God's coming to a stable in Bethlehem have to do with us? Is the birth in Bethlehem simply a story that warms our hearts on cold December days? Or is it something else? Is there something else to that story? Do we even dare hope that perhaps this story is so filled with power that maybe this year it will actually transform our hearts somehow and save our very lives? Do we dare to even enter the promise made in Bethlehem that not only will it save us, but it is indeed powerful enough to save the whole world? These are really big questions. But when it comes to how God is active in our lives and world, there are no small ones. So it's no surprise then, really, that our Advent season begins with another apocalyptic passage where Jesus is talking about the end of the world. Big questions deserve big answers. And contained in this passage are some of the biggest answers of all. You see, the advent of God, or the coming of God into the world, changes absolutely everything. I don't know of any other passage in the Gospels that is harder to understand or to feel our way into or to know how to respond to than these ones. These words of Jesus about the second coming, about the end of the world and the second coming. He is speaking about the end of the world as we know it, and the inbreaking of God's reign where all things will be different. A time where the world will become a place of peace and harmony for all of creation. Now his apocalyptic words are foreign, very foreign to our way of thinking. And too often we take them so literally that we spend all of our time looking to the clouds and waiting for God in some kind of frightened anticipation, as opposed to looking around at our world or even looking within to find God already at work. In this passage, Jesus is reminding us that God is among us. God is busy and at work. And that when God comes, there is going to be great upheaval. Where God works, there is great upheaval. But the upheaval is not of the world without. It's not in the earthquakes. It's not in the tsunamis that we see. The upheaval comes in the world within. An upheaval of the hearts and minds and spirits of the human race. The seas will go wild, we hear. The seas will go wild and the nations will be terrified at the roaring sound that comes with such a change. This, Jesus reminds us, is to be expected, because it is no small thing to change the world. We humans have grown comfortable in living with the mixture of light and dark as we do. We have grown well used to thinking that this is simply how the world is. You know, there's some good, there's some bad, there's some love, there's some, whatever the opposite of love is, hate. And all we need to do, because this is the way the world is, and all we need to do is adapt to the world's ways. You know, endure the ugly times, kind of hunker down and hold on and endure the ugly times. And then breathe easier when we manage to find a little space where there's some peace and happiness. And this is an understandable response to living in this world. Makes sense, because the darkness can seem overwhelming at times. But as Jesus reminds us in our passage today, it might make sense, but it's a really small way to live. And today Jesus is inviting us to live big, like big, to open our hearts to the very real, very powerful promise of God. The promise contained in the birth in the Bethlehem stable, that the world is going to change for the better. Our lives are going to change for the better. Reminds us that this change is not our doing, even though the United Church of Canada often tries to, save the world. It's not our doing. It's God's doing. God does the changing. And we are called quite simply to do the living. Like Jesus reminded us, we are to look for signs of change. We are to be alert, to be on guard for the signs of life. And there are many signs of life. And we are called to pay attention to the details. And when we see the new thing that God is doing, when we see the evidence of life, then we are to go and live in that place. Live in the places where there is life for all. Live into that way of being in the world, even if no one else seems to be doing that. Advent is a season where we are called to put down our burdens of guilt or shame or powerlessness. Put down our sense that the way our lives and world are is the way that they shall always be. That's a burden we need to lay down. We need to lay down whatever burden that keeps us from seeing the signs of life all around us, so that then we are free to lift up our song to God, right? Our praise song to God, joyful living. Advent is a season where we remind one another that the promises of God are powerfully true, that love will win and peace will reign. It's a season when we learn to overcome our fear and foreboding. We need to put that behind us and once more open our hearts to others, just like God has demonstrated that kind of open-heartedness to us, the one that we see in the gift of Christ. The season of Advent and Jesus' words from Luke requires a certain amount of mindfulness from us. Yes, we do need to keep awake and alert to the universe around us, but we also need to be alert and awake to the cosmos within us. It requires as well a certain sense of recognition and acceptance of others with all of their spiritual baggage and insecurities. God knows we don't have any baggage or insecurities, right? But to be open to the spiritual open to all, which is no small task in an age characterized by polarization and mistrust, right? We live in a world where they're right, they're wrong, they're good, they're bad, right? Polarization. But as people of faith, we are called to live into the light, live into the joining together. We are to look at one another as brothers and sisters living in the light, all are worthy of love and welcome. Even if we're flawed and frightfully strange, we are all in this together. And this is what it is to see God at work. And this is where the saving love of God is most powerful. It's in that coming together. But it sure can be a challenge to live this way. Our faith teaches us that Christ brings joy. But the fact remains that we still know sadness. Our faith teaches us that Christ brings life, but we still know death. So putting out the welcome mat and hanging that open for business sign in the window of our hearts can seem a foolish thing to do. Foolish and scary during this or any time of year to actually be that open to everyone. But if we're to live big lives, if we're to live life-filled lives, where the stranger is welcome, where the littlest have what they need, where peace has a chance, and love fills hearts, then we need to be open in that very open way. The promises of God are true. There will come a time when the world will know true peace. There will come a time when the world does indeed turn. But until that time, you and I get to wait. And we don't always like waiting. Patience is hard. And while we wait, we need to remember that waiting for Christ to save us and our world is not a passive thing, right? We don't get to sit in our easy chair and put our feet up. Waiting for that kind of inbreaking of God's power into our lives is not a pious, churchy thing. On the contrary, to wait for Christ to come in his fullness, whether we're waiting for him to change our hearts or change the world, means we choose to live in the light in the meantime. We choose to live in ways that are open and loving in the meantime. It means that above all else, we act as Christ to one another. We choose to love, to welcome, to forgive, and to be compassionate to all, including ourselves, just as Christ is loving and compassionate to all. So this, my friends, is what Advent is all about. This is what we're starting our journey towards Christmas. It's a living into the promise that is big enough, truly big enough, to save us all. May it be so in your life and in mine. Amen.